Alright, we're continuing to investigate Piltdown Man. Let's see if it's a hoax. So far it is. This is where we left off. The Piltdown Man hoax. Mr. Charles Darwin was credited with this find. Bit of a mystery. We looked at the skull and compared its capacity with modern man. It's found wanting. Professor Arthur Keith, curator, Museum of Royal College of Surgeons, London, demonstrated that the Piltdown skull capacity had been severely underrated. He showed it was closer to 1,500 cc's. Professor Keith was a believer in evolution, but he wanted facts, not misrepresentations. The reconstructors had also done something with the placing of the teeth that did not pass scientific investigation. They put the one canine tooth on the right side of the lower jaw and at an angle to conform to that of an ape's tooth. In 2 successive years, 1914 and 15, 2 American professors pointed out that the lower canine was not a lower tooth at all. Neither was it a right tooth, but a left and an upper tooth. Before this, however, in 1913, Professor Garrett Miller, United States National Museum, objected to the classing together of the jaw, teeth, and cranium. The professor, who was well versed in his subject and had a goodly supply of anthropoid and human bones for comparison, said, "The jaw and tooth belong to a fossil chimpanzee." Remember, these disclosures all took place within 3 to 4 years of the discovery of Piltdown Man. Yet scientists paraded this reconstructed hoax before children and adults alike for the next 40 years. They used this as evidence of man's evolution from the lower animals. Then when they could no longer hide the fact, they tried to pass off the loss of this link as a very minor manner, something that in no wise reacted against evolution. Wow. William P. Hoare, New American. The Guardian Weekly put it this way in 1978. In the last decade, geologists have found rock layers of all divisions of the last 500 million years, and no transitional forms were contained in them. There are even intriguing suspicions expressed by some prominent evolutionists that Jesuit philosopher and paleontologist Teilhard de Chardin was culpably involved in the long-standing Piltdown Man hoax. Johnson recounts a supposed ancestor of Homo sapiens found under Piltdown Commons in Sussex during 1908 to 15, and not exposed as a hoax until 1953. The pressure to find confirmation of a missing link was so great that it led to one spectacular fraud, Piltdown Man, which British museum officials jealously protected from unfriendly inspection, allowing it to perform 40 years of useful service in molding public opinion. Author Marvin L. Lupinow of Bones of Contention. The Piltdown fossils were discovered between 1908 and 1915. It was not until 1953, 38 to 45 years later, that Kenneth Oakley, Joseph Weiner, and William LaGrosse Clark discovered that Piltdown Man was a fraud. The British Museum then issued a statement to that effect. There is the possibility that the skull itself was legitimately found in the pit. Radiocarbon dating determined it to be from 520 to 720 years old. Piltdown Common had been used as a mass grave during the Great Plague of AD 1348 to 9. The skull bones were quite thick, a characteristic of more ancient fossils, and the skull had been treated with potassium bichromate by Dawson to harden and preserve it. This was a common practice for the treatment of fossils at that time. The other bones and stone tools had undoubtedly been planted in the pit and had been treated to match the dark brown color of the skull. The lower jaw was that of a juvenile female orangutan. How do you treat things that don't belong together to make them look like they do belong together? The place where the jaw could articulate with the skull had been broken off to hide the fact that it did not fit the skull. Wow. They retrofitted the skull. The teeth of the mandible were filed down to match the teeth of the upper jaw, and the canine tooth had been filed down to make it look like a heavily worn. Wow. It was only in 1982 that both the mandible and the canine tooth were determined conclusively by collagen reactions to be those of an orangutan. Gerald Lowenstein, Mollison and Washburn, Piltdown jaw confirmed as orang. Wow. It seems likely that whoever put the canine tooth in the pot knew that the mandible was also that of orangutan. Orangs are found today only in Borneo and Sumatra. Some of the mammalian bones probably came from the other areas of England, but the mastodon molar is thought to have come from Tunisia and the hippopotamus molar from the island of Malta. Boy, they put everything together from all over the world. Some of the flints in the pit may also have come from Tunisia. It is obvious that whoever perpetrated this hoax either had traveled extensively or had access to some exotic fossil and archaeological collections. Piltdown should have been uncovered long before it was. Like Boulay's reconstruction of the Neanderthal skeleton from La Chapelle-aux-Saints, there were elements about it that were quite obvious. The file marks on the orangutan teeth on the lower jaw were clearly visible. The molars were misaligned and filed at different angles. The canine tooth had been filed down so far that the pulp cavity had been exposed and then plugged. If science were really self-correcting, the Piltdown man fraud should have been discovered soon after it was committed, rather than 38 to 45 years later. When the Piltdown fossils were brought to the British Museum, plaster casts were made of them for display to the public. However, museums seldom indicate that the fossils on display are replicas, and most people thought they were seeing the real thing. Yet while people thought they were looking and seeing actual fossils of their evolutionary ancestors, they were looking at fakes. But more than just looking at fakes, they were looking at fakes of fakes. Wow. The SpyMan fabrication. It's still raining. I better put this up. Theodore Epp. There is a case of an earlier find in 1886 in which the reconstruction of was called the SpyMan because the bones were discovered in Spy, Belgium. These bones did not at all belong to the same skeleton, but were parts of two skeletons. They were pieced together by scientists to resemble the kind of creature they wanted to depict. Professor C.R. Knight said of the SpyMan, his lowering face accentuates his squat ferocity, and his chin, where is it? That deep and heavy jaw and gorilla-like characteristics. The significant thing about this is that there was neither face nor head nor chin nor jaw. There was no skull found. They just completely made it up from scratch. The reconstruction was a sheer fabrication. The Java Man of 1926. Let me pull my leg brace down. Comfortable seat in this rain. All right, much better. Still raining. Okay, now we got Java Man of 1926. A later discovery in Java, long after Dubois' original Java Man, which was finally determined to not even be human, was labeled as a Homo erectus, a missing link. The same story seems to get popularity and money. A bone was discovered in Java in 1926, claimed to be a new skull of the Pithecanthropus erectus type. They still go with this and let people look proof that. This was hailed as another link in the evolutionary chain. It had to be abandoned, however, after it was found that the so-called skull was an elephant's knee bone. Wow. I don't even know his anatomy. Nebraska Man. There was also the case of a tooth found in Nebraska in 1922, which is accepted as evidence of man's antiquity and descent from the brute. A few years later, the entire skeleton of the creature was found, and the tooth was identified as belonging to an extinct species of pig. Dr. Don Patton says, Dr. Harry Fairfield Osborne went to Nebraska and, based on a fossil tooth which Dr. Harold Cook found, announced to the world, America had its missing link. Well, he made the mistake of allowing the experts to look carefully at the originals. Unlike Dubois, with his originals, he hid them in the floorboards, and he decided eventually that this was an extinct pig. And in fact, the next year they found a complete jaw with teeth intact, and it was very obviously an extinct pig. And we have the Taung fossil. 1924, Professor Raymond Dart, anatomist at the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa, acquired a skull that had come from a lime works at Taung. It was the skull and endocranial cast of an extinct primate child, which Dart named Australopithecus africanus. By 1960, it would have been difficult to find any public school book that touched on human origins that did not have a picture of this in the Taung skull. Until Lucy was discovered in late 1974, Taung, the type specimen of Australopithecus africanus, was considered our oldest direct evolutionary ancestor. Taung was generally considered to be between 2 and 3 million years old. In 1973, South African geologist T.C. Partridge dropped the bomb. His investigations revealed that the cave from which the Taung skull had come from could not have been formed prior to 0.87 million years ago. A million years, just about a million. Date's a little off, since it could take up to a million years for the hominids to evolve from one species to another. To go all the way from Australopithecines to modern humans is only 750,000 years was out of the question. Further, true humans were already on the scene in Africa 0.75 million years ago, according to the established evolutionary timetable. And Carl Butzer, University of Chicago, clearly saw the problem when he wrote, "If the Taung specimen is indeed no older than the youngest robust Australopithecine of the Transvaal, then such a late local survivor of the glacial, the term used to describe the Africanus fossils, lineage, wouldn't seem to pose new evolutionary problems." Let's dump this one. You got to get their act together, guys. Carl Butcher, Paleoecology of South Africa, Australopithecines, Taung Revisited, Current Anthropology. Anatomist Philip Tobias, then at University of Witwatersrand, pointed out to the real problem. The fact remains that less than 1 million years is a discrepant age for a supposed glacial Australopithecine in the gradually emerging picture of African hominid evolution. Not old enough. Here was a problem which, if allowed to persist, could jeopardize the concept of human evolution. It was time for the evolutionist to wave his magic wand. A.J.B. Humphreys wrote, "One point that needs investigation at the outset, however, is the question of the identification of the Taung skull as Australopithecus africanus. The possibility that the Taung skull might represent Homo habilis, or a more advanced creature than A. africanus, certainly deserves more consideration in view of this younger date. So throw it out and start over again. If your piano isn't in tune, tune it up." Philip Tobias suggested another way the wand might be waved. Perhaps because its brain and its dental characters would exclude it from H. erectus, it must seriously be considered whether the Taung child is not a late surviving member of A. robustus or A. cf. robustus, more advanced hominid, and not in the human lineage, which is said to eventually become extinct without evolving. Can't fit it in? Then declare it was extinct. Philip V. Tobias, Implications of the New Age Estimates of the Early South American Hominids. So much for all of those. Tobias then made this amazing confession. Although nearly 50 years have elapsed since its discovery, it is true to say that the Taung skull has never yet been fully analyzed and described. Wow, all that evidence. For 50 years, the public was told that Taung was our evolutionary ancestor. Now we're told the appropriate analysis and description of the fossil had never been done. In spite of the fact that without further study, the suggestion was made that perhaps Taung was closer to humans, habilis, and not in the human lineage at all, the robusts. When Johansen and Tim White revised the hominid family tree in 1979, Afarensis, including Lissy, was replaced Africanus, including Taung, as a direct non-human evolutionary ancestor. The dating of Taung thus became a non-issue. We just bypass it. Inconsistent. The Africanus forms were moved to the Australopithecine branch of the family tree, becoming the link between Lucy and the robust Australopithecines, which are presupposed as extinct and are not in line with humanity. keep changing their story. The comfortable arrangement to dismiss all Afrikaners remains as insignificant